Finality latency of 5.7 milliseconds.
All right, we're going to get started. Good evening and welcome to Backwards Never, Representation, Justice, and Equity for Cannabis Workers in today's cannabis industry. This is a town hall conversation presented by the UFCW International Union. Yeah, it's kind of My name is Precious Osai Garissa, and I have the honor of being your mistress of ceremonies for this evening. I am the Communications Director at Minority Cannabis Business Association, and I'm also the co-founder and chief operating officer of Grow Black Inc., which is a New Jersey-based delivery and retail company in the cannabis space. But of all of my various positions, being an advocate and an activist for a plant that's bringing us all together today is probably my most important. Not probably, really is my most important. The opportunity to fight for equity after watching the war on drugs systemically harm Black and brown communities is my truest passion, and really the reason that I'm here, and I'm hoping that all of you are here today too. And we have a conversation that you'll find that these are the main themes and topics that we'll discuss. We have a dynamic group of speakers and moderators tonight that I'm thrilled to introduce to you. But before we get into that, I'm going to take care of a bit of housekeeping and thank the folks who actually helped us get here today. First, we'd like to thank the United Food and Commercial Workers, USCW International Union, and all of the New England locals for making this event possible. Across the country, USCW has spent nearly 2 decades in this emerging industry, advocating for workers and fighting to establish critical labor protections. This includes sustainability, equity, safe practices, and more. As the industry continues to develop, USCW is committed to supporting all cannabis workers across the country who are interested in organizing in any type of workplace from seed to sale. So please give it up for USCW. We'd also like to thank the organizer for this event, Marvin Bain and his team for moving on behalf of cannabis workers and bringing us here today. Also, thank you to Roxbury Community College and President Jackie Judy Scott for hosting us in this wonderful facility, and all the staff who've been moving to get us here and situated. Shout out to you guys. You guys have been complete rock stars working with us. Thank you to the Big Hope Project and the Boston's Mayor's Office of Economic and Opportunity and Inclusion. And we'd also like to thank Martin Luther King III and our esteemed speakers for joining us tonight and who you'll be hearing from shortly. So let's talk about a little bit why we're here today, about cannabis job market. So if you read the release, you saw that according to Leafly jobs report, over 400,000 full-time jobs supported the legal cannabis industry as of January 2022. Last year, the cannabis industry created an average of 280 new jobs per day. That's a 33% increase in the jobs in a single year. And those were plant-touching jobs as well as ancillary businesses. Here in Massachusetts, we're also seeing a robust and well-regulated cannabis industry, seeing upwards of $1.65 billion in total sales in 2021. Sales supported over 27,000 jobs. That's incredible. So we know that jobs are being created, but how is economic well-being of workers being guaranteed? And who is working to support quality of life for workers? Now, I have a personal story about the power of unions, in this case, UFCW back in Jersey. So prior to New Jersey unlocking its adult use market, a letter went out from our and provided testimony. And it was worth it. Were heard, and soon after that ruling was reversed. So when working people come together, I see personally how good things happen. So with that said, with the background of what we're here to talk about, I'm so excited to bring out our moderators and our panelists. So please join me in welcoming our moderators. First, we have State Senator Lydia Edwards. Senator Edwards is a career advocate and the voice on behalf of all society's most vulnerable. Prior to being elected to the state senate and Boston City Council, Senator Edwards worked extensively in the legal field, focusing on labor issues such as fighting for access to unemployment insurance, back wages, fair treatment for domestic workers, and combating human trafficking. Thank you, State Senator. We also have as a moderator Shakia Scott. Shakia Scott is the Cannabis Business Manager in the Mayor's Office of Economic Opportunity. Yes. In this role, she oversees the certification for the Boston Equity Program for cannabis businesses, manages the Applicant Technical Assistance Program, and provides aid for cannabis entrepreneurs through all stages of development. She also served as the inaugural Director of Equity and Community Outreach for the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission. Welcome, Shakia. And our third moderator for tonight, we have Janae Osterheld. Janae is a culture columnist who covers identity and social justice through the lens of culture and arts at the Boston Globe. And now to our panelists. First up, we have Shailene Title, founder and director of the Puebla Center of Law and Policy and former commissioner for the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission. Next up, we have Ademola Oyefeso, the International Vice President and Director of the Legislative and Political Action Department at the UFC International Union. Next, we have Candy Angel, Head of TEAL, Together for Equity, Access, and Legislation for WeMaps. She is the National Director for all things social justice, social impact, and corporate responsibility for WeMaps. Next up, we have Al Harrington, CEO of Viola, the nation's first multinational African-American-owned cannabis vertical. The purple wasn't on purpose, okay? Following that, we have Roz McCarthy, founder and CEO of Minorities for Medical Marijuana, and she's also the founder and CEO of Black Buddha Cannabis. Following, we have Tito Jackson, founder and CEO of Apex Noir Cannabis and former Boston City Council. You did a good job as a council person, huh? Next up, we have Michael Curry, CEO of the Massachusetts League of Community Health Centers and the NAACP National Board Member and New England Area Conference Administrator. He's on his way. He will be here shortly. And lastly, certainly not least, I'd like to welcome Martin Luther King III. You guys can have a seat as I'm going to tell you a little bit about Mr. Martin Luther King III. With the past year's astounding display of social injustice, violence, and confusion around the pandemic, perhaps at no other time in recent history has our world needed the clear thinking and solutions-oriented voice of civil rights advocate and global humanitarian Martin Luther King III. From speaking to thousands at the August 2020 March on Washington to his dozens of arrests during peaceful protests, Mr. King is spearheading and healing our nation and the world, connecting the important lessons of the past with the critical needs of our future and motivating a new generation of authentic leaders. As the oldest son of the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Mrs. Coretta Scott King, Martin Luther King III is a thought leader on the world stage, a peacemaker and a negotiator on some of today's most critical national and international platforms for social change. He has worked to eradicate racism, violence, and poverty on every continent except in our time. Of amplifying the work for his father, Mr. King has devoted his life to promoting global human rights and has consulted with numerous heads of states and governments, earning a reputation as a respected international statesman and one of the world's most passionate advocates for the poor and oppressed. Most recently, Mr. King and his wife, Andrea Waters King, have taken their leadership of the Drum Major Institute, a nonprofit organization started over 60 years ago with a focus on continuing the King legacy through education, action, engagement with world leaders, and collaboration on socially conscious organizations. The work of the Drum Major Institute is as important today as it was then, especially inspiring individuals to embrace their unique contribution to peace, justice, and equity for all. Martin Luther King III is the recipient of many numerous awards and several honorary degrees, including one of India's most prestigious honors for outstanding contributions to the promotion of human rights. Mr. King and his wife, Andrea, are the proud parents of a young daughter, Yolanda Renee King, the only grandchild of Martin Luther King III. The entire family is dedicated to sharing the impactful Kingian, oh, it's the first time I heard that one, message to inspire a collective of new collaborators and world changers. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to pass the program over to our moderators.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being here tonight. This is an exciting conversation with experts literally from all over the country to discuss equity, to discuss race, and to discuss overall fairness and workers' rights in the cannabis industry. I want to just go through some more statistics about where we are here in Massachusetts, and then we're going to start to ask each of our wonderful panelists some individual questions. We'll kick it off with an overall panel discussion, and then my friends, moderators, we will share the microphones and ask questions as well as we get through this conversation. But again, I just have to say what an honor it is to be with you, Mr. King, and I just want to say that again. I never thought I would ever be. I'm sorry, I'm normally not this nervous, but yeah, I can't help it. I mean, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? I'm sorry. All right. So let's just discuss where we are right now and the incredible statistics that we have for Massachusetts. Nationally, according to the Legal Jobs Report, there are about 428,000 jobs, full-time jobs supported by the legal cannabis industry as of January of 2022. Last year, the cannabis industry created an average of 280 jobs a day. This is a growing industry. That's a 33% increase in jobs in a single year. So it's the fifth, and it marks the fifth year in a row, of annual job growth greater than 27%. This is the industry. Massachusetts continues to operate, as we've heard earlier. It's a well-regulated cannabis industry. Some would argue probably overly regulated in some cases, but it's getting there. About 27,000 jobs here in Massachusetts, and about $1.65 billion in total sales in 2021. Right, I mean, that's during COVID. So 2022 numbers still need to come in, and I'm sure 2023 will be even bigger. The 2021 figure that I just gave you, 1.65 billion, is an 81% increase over 2020 sales. We're at 81%. In part because we have more licenses and more access throughout the state, with about 387 retail licenses today as of 2022. These numbers are impressive, and they're going to grow. But the crucial question is, for who, and where, and how? This panel is going to delve into that, and so I'm going to kick it off with a general question. Very rare in generations will you ever be at the beginning of an industry. Very rare will you see it become legalized, and very rarely will you have the generational lessons of racism, of classism, of anti-union, all of that in other industries to learn from. And we have all of that. So here we are with these lessons and this opportunity to shape this industry for the first time. So let's talk in general. Why is that such a great opportunity, and why is it so important that industry have the union jobs, that we have good jobs, and that we are making sure that is grounded in its foundation from day one, instead of something we're continually chipping at generations from now. So I will start with, we'll just go from that one side and come to the other, if that's okay. All right.
Okay, all right, how about now? Better? Thank you. So it's such a loaded question, and I'm just gonna make it really short and sweet and to the point. That your point about you will never see an industry in our generation where you can get in at the ground level right now, and you can dictate what your path is. And we need to embrace this. We need to embrace this from the perspective that this is an industry that should be open to all people, from equity ownership, also to protection for workers. We can set the trend, we can set the foundation of what this industry represents, but you have to get involved. You have to get involved on the policy side, you have to get involved in regards to educating our community, because we have an opportunity, but we also are fighting against the stigma about this plan. And it's so hard because, you know, on one side, we in this group know this plant and we love this plant, but the outside mainstream, they still need to get connected to understand the potentiality of this plant and of this opportunity. So for me, it was just like, my connection to this plant started with my son having sickle cell anemia and losing my mom to breast cancer. And I know my why. And I encourage everyone, understand what your why is and figure out where to get in now. Your opportunity is now. Don't look back or don't say, well, let me just wait. Don't wait, because now's the opportunity. And all these people on the stage here will be able to give you examples of how they've been able to make it work and how they've been able to bring in and find their traction, like my friend Al Harrington, setting the trend and creating something from nothing. So I'll pause right there because I could be very wordy sometimes and go on and on and on. But it's a matter of your point of saying that the time is now, and you'll never find another industry where the opportunity is now for us to move.
That's good. She said everything I was going to say. But I think that what's really important is that, you know, that we have to look at this as a generational wealth opportunity, you know, for our community as a whole, right? You know, they use this cannabis plant to pretty much destroy our community. You know, 85% of all drug arrests in our community over the last 40 years have been cannabis related. So that just lets you know that that's something that, you know, we should own, especially at this point in this industry where there's billions of dollars being made. And right now, you know, we only represent, you know, 4 to 6%. And to me, that's pretty embarrassing, right? So that's why these social equity opportunities are so important. And then we talk about workforce, it's the same thing, right? These are unbelievable opportunities to get in at the ground floor that, you know, just 2 years experience really makes you an expert, you know, and you should be paid like that. And I know I pay people like that, you know what I'm saying? So I just look at it as a great opportunity that we just cannot pass up. And, you know, we got to continue to work together to make sure that it just makes sense for, you know, especially people who come. We have to join forces.
Well, first, I just want to say thank you to the UFCW and the Big Hope Project for bringing us all together. Everybody who cares about workers to have this collective conversation. I think that we don't talk about this enough. Why is it so important to have jobs that are good, that are stable, that we have an industry that doesn't exploit workers, and why is it so urgent right now? I think the reason and the opportunity is that, like the Senator said, we only have this one chance to do it right. And you can see that from the past 7 years in Massachusetts. Those decisions that we made at first, they've only been around for 7 years, but they are somewhat entrenched at this point, right? And you look at the decisions that were made 100 years ago when alcohol prohibition was lifted, they largely have not changed. So we only have a chance to really do this once, and we need to make sure that all of us, labor rights groups, civil rights groups, racial justice rights groups, that we all get on the same page, that we're united in what we're asking for at the state level and the federal level. This is our chance. And if you'll just indulge me for 1 second, before we had legalization in cannabis, my son used to sit in my lap as a baby at these speaking engagements. He's 9 years old, he's here tonight. He's just starting to get what this is about. So hi, Neil.
Light up.
Good evening. I guess I want to speak on this topic a little bit. I'm not an expert, as many are, and who directly are involved, from a couple of perspectives. First of all, it's good to be back in Boston. I was here last week for the Embrace unveiling, the monument in Boston Commons, and some of us were there together as well last week, and maybe some of you were there. But I want to think, first of all, I'm thinking about the fact, as has been stated, that there are very few ground floor opportunities that exist in our nation. Now, that we are aware of. Something happens every week, a new business is created all the time, but we don't necessarily know about it. We're informed. We still have a lot of work to do from a research perspective to understand how you get engaged and actually specifically do this, but it's a ground floor opportunity. And as has been said, you shouldn't miss out. But I also speak from the perspective of understanding where labor comes in. Organized labor has been so involved in our struggle for freedom and justice. 60 years ago, this year, my father basically shared his dream for our nation and world, freedom and justice and equality. And it was organized labor that was also involved significantly. There was a march, some of you may or may not know this, but before the March on Washington, which was August 28, 1963, there was a march in Detroit, Michigan, where over 100,000 people marched down Woodward Avenue, and it was led by my dad, Walter Reuther of the UAW, and the late Reverend Dr. C.L. Franklin, Aretha Franklin's father. But organized labor, I want to raise that point with United Food and Commercial Workers, I'll say it that way, as opposed to the acronym, representing people's interests, because there are many levels where people will be working. And organized labor is so important, even though there are corporations trying to stop them from existing. But workers' rights need to be protected. Families need to be protected and lifted up. And that's what organized labor does, helps protect and make sure that you have a voice. Because this industry at some point is going to change dramatically. But it's that organizing, that labor that represents what you want to see. The final thing I'll say for this particular moment is that what I'm learning is we live in a very interesting nation and world. And I think we're going to find there are more applications of cannabis for all kinds of things that we don't know about yet. So we're at the tip of the iceberg, but there are some whose lives have been transformed. I was talking with Brother Al Harrington earlier, and he was telling me about his grandmother. And hopefully he'll get to share that story, but probably everybody up here has a story like that, that has helped to transform their lives. So this is something we need to stay on the playing field, get engaged, and be a part of. And it also was talked about legislation across university. We all need to be speaking from the same sheet of music, and that can be done. We've seen it done in this country many times, and we need to do it, and we need to do it now. Thank you.
Switch up this rotation so I don't have to speak after him every single time. That's a little rough. I want to start and go back to what Roz said about getting involved and making sure that this is very political. This plant is very political. And so getting involved in any way that you can is going to be extremely important. And getting in where you fit in, like don't force something on yourself if you don't know how to do it. Like just because you can get a license isn't always that you should get a license unless you're prepared to really do that work and know what you're doing. But there are so many ways to be in this industry. It doesn't have to be plant touching. You don't have to have a license. And so whatever it is that you're good at now is easily transferable over to the cannabis industry. And I think keeping that in mind, that it's not always plant touching, is going to be important. And then going to the labor unions, I think this is what's going to help us really make this a normal industry like any other industry. And in the long run, that's where federal legalization is going to finally come, is when we really normalize this industry. And I think the labor unions are the way for that.
Good evening, everyone. I feel real comfortable here in Roxbury. How's Roxbury doing? At Roxbury Community College. I want to thank everyone for coming out, and Brother King, I want to thank you, as well as this august panel. I feel like I'm in the presence of greatness up here. But I absolutely agree with the ground floor component, but I think we also have to acknowledge another caveat about the ground floor component. We have transferable skills. Let's keep it real. This is not a new industry. Folks, I'm only going to speak for Roxbury. I shout out to my friends at Pure Oasis. They were not the first people to sell cannabis on Blue Hill Ave. Can the brother get an amen? Okay. That's what's up. So I'm going to keep it real, but there's a couple of components here. And shout out to labor, because one, there's just simply not enough of us in this space, because I believe the number is about 17%. Now let's juxtapose that to how I got in this space. You see Shalene, she looks all nice and all that. Okay, I was elected official not too long ago. She rode up in the brother's office. She might have kicked in the door, waving the 4-4. And she said, you have to sign on to this. And this is a legalization. I said, do you know who my mama is? You understand, her and Sister Odell are gonna go off on the brother, right? And so she broke it down though. The ACLU did a study, and what they looked at was in 2008 in the state of Massachusetts, having an ounce or less became a ticket. But then from 2008 to 2014, if you were Black, you had a 300% higher chance of getting arrested for what we just said was legal, and a 700% higher chance of getting arrested for distribution. Key point here, Massachusetts is 7% Black. I know this room looks like this, but it's only 7% Black. So we are disproportionately arrested and incarcerated over this substance. And so that's a critical component, and that's one of the reasons why I signed on and became the first elected official to back the legalization of cannabis in the state. But this is also a life or death issue. And why is it a life or death issue in Boston? Because my old city council district went from Roxbury to Back Bay. There's a 33-year difference in life expectancy from Roxbury to Back Bay. If you live in Back Bay, you live to 91.9. If you live in Roxbury, you live to 58.9. And it's also all about the Benjamins. So the median net worth of a white family in Boston is $247,500. The median net worth of a Black family, and this is even with Al Harrington sitting here, is $8. And that's $8. $8. And so that's real. And so I'll be darned. Brother King is here. I'll be darned if I sit and let Netta, which is in Brookline, make $90 million a year, and our folks are not able to eat and have the health care that they need, get the hours that they need, and be able to have the right to. So very happy to be here. I really look forward to continuing this conversation. But one of the things that we all must understand is what a former Bostonian also said, and that is our brother Frederick Douglass. And he said, "We are one, our cause is one, and we must work together if we are to succeed." Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, King, for being here. I represent the labor union that is trying to represent cannabis workers across the country. And a lot of folks talk about equity in cannabis, but when they talk about equity, they're talking about the licenses. And I want to make sure that there's equity in the licenses. But the majority of people who got arrested for cannabis don't have the money to finance a license, because you need millions of dollars. But they do have the skill, as everyone said. You know, these companies weren't the first selling in our neighborhoods. People have been selling for years, but they should get those jobs. And what we've seen a lot is employers come in and say, we're gonna hire people from the neighborhood, don't worry, we'll make sure they have good jobs. And those jobs turn into McDonald's jobs, $1 over minimum wage, like, that's a good job. What the union's trying to do is say, hey, people were arrested for years. They should get these jobs, but these jobs should do the following. They should have low-cost health care. They should have a retirement, pension, whatever it may be. They should have that so that people can retire when they get older. They should pay good wages so that you're in the middle class. You may have heard it before. Unions help you get in the middle class. I grew up in a neighborhood where Black folks owned homes. Black and brown people owned houses because they worked in a job that had a union. And now we're starting this industry where in Boston, the senator said that it was over $1 billion made in 1 year. And I'm not trying to take, the union's not trying to take money out of every employer's hands, but we're trying to say if there's over $1 billion made, everyone that works in the industry should have a full-time job, and they should be making enough that they can support their family, raise kids, go to good school, get a vacation. That's what the union's about. And Brother King said it's about the legislation. Because there are good employers out there who you don't have to fight to make sure they do the right thing. But good employers sell businesses. And when they sell, they might sell to a bad employer. So we need to make sure we're locking in legislation that says they have to have a union and they have to deal with the union. So because I'll tell you, I can go have a fight with Al. I can take him, he's not that big. But, you know, he probably can't take Al. So, but that's the thing, we're all different, but if it's both of us, we're definitely gonna take him. And that's what it's about. The union's about all of us coming together and making sure we get every employer to do the right thing, to make sure they're lifting everyone up. Because if Al has a license, Al will make good money. But Al, I already know, he's gonna make sure we all make good money. And it's not about it's about everyone lifting up everybody, from the owner to every single worker. Because if you look, it's a problem for Black folks. We were all getting arrested. For brown folks, our Latino, Latinx brothers were getting arrested, but also poor people. Because when you go around the whole country, there are places where, you know, Boston has 7%, Washington State has less. But the people that were arrested were Black, brown, and poor white people. So we need to make sure everyone gets a piece of this. Because we're all in the same struggle. People try to divide us, but we're all in the same struggle. And that means, because you'll find some dispensaries, even in some neighborhoods across, where the owner wants to hire white kids because they're like, oh, well, they know the system. So the union has started a training program to make sure that people know how to do the work. Like in the state of New Jersey, the state funded a program with almost $500,000 to help train workers all across. And it's a program that our union has done to make sure that everyone is ready for those jobs. And there isn't an excuse about it. So these are all the things I know our locals that are here, we want to make sure we want to bring it into Massachusetts because we're like, I don't want to give anyone the excuse to say, I can't hire Joe because Joe, he doesn't know how to properly just set a display case. He doesn't know how to work the manufacturing. We want to make sure every job is open to everybody who's been affected by this drug. All right.
Thank you. We're just now going to go with popcorn to different questions to some of our panelists. We'll start with Mr. King first. Since we did just speak about the importance of unions, I would love for you to make that bridge for us. Well, not for this audience necessarily, but give us talking points for other audiences when we're trying to bridge a lot of what our law is founded in is racial equity and talking about the war on drugs and understanding how racial equity is part of the union conversation, or vice versa, that unions are part of the racial equity conversation. I know for many people, the biggest concern is that at the beginning of an industry, this green rush, as we've talked about before, right? This green rush to get in is going to have a lot of people, some of us call up to the top, becoming elites and robber barons or top dollar earners of our industry. And then for them, that's equity. Equity for them is that you can exploit and pay workers nothing or very little, the minimum wage, just like the white guys do. For some people, that's the goal, to be the CEO. And as long as more of us are at the top, well, then that's where us winning. But we know better. And so the real concern for a lot of us is making sure that that racial equity conversation doesn't stop at the licenses, doesn't stop at who's becoming the millionaires, and really starts and is completely grounded in unionization. We have the statistics. It shows that cannabis workers of color earn up to 32% more than if they're in a union versus the non-union workers. 32% more. That is building the middle class. That is transformative for families. That is making sure that many of us are able to have a completely different future. But for me, I'm going to go to Beacon Hill. You're coming with me. I filed the bill. We're going to try and make this. I got to make that narrative. This is racial justice. You pass a law on racial justice and equity. The union is part of that conversation. So help us with that.
First of all, I think it's critical to understand and be a part of the information flow, because it said that people that do not know their history are doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. And in this particular situation specifically, first of all, we live in a nation that is still grappling with what the minimum wage should be. First, and I don't even know why we even have that discussion in this country. What I mean by that is we should be further ahead. We should be far along. Even $15, which is a decent amount in some cities. Maybe not in Boston. I don't know. I know not in New York, not in Atlanta. Has gotten out of control, Al, as you know now. So you know, it's insulting that we live in a nation. I'm going to change the topic and I'm going to come back, because my dad and mom wanted to eradicate the triple evils of poverty, racism, and violence. And we live in a nation where nearly 100 million people are living in poverty. Now, the statistics about what they tell you are something like, oh, we have less poverty than we've ever had. No, we have more poverty. And then every last one of our cities has people living on the streets. And all this opulence. I mean, I look around this city, my city, and not just in our cities, also in our rural areas. How do you have a nation that has a multi-trillion-dollar economy, and yet you still continue to have poor folk? And especially when you have industries like this just started, where there's real opportunity. Now, of course, again, it's about information. If you don't know, I mean, if you're an investor in stock and you have a lot of money, and at some point the stock market is going to collapse, if you didn't know it was going to collapse, you'll be out of money tomorrow. But if you know and have some provisions in place and are able to plan so that that won't impact you as much, you may lose something, but you won't lose everything. And so you have to be wise. Now, I think the biggest issue, one of the biggest issues that we have in the Black and brown community is we don't have enough unity. And so we have got to deliberately build bridges. We first got to build bridges in the Black community, frankly. I mean, we do not support each other enough. I mean, last year Black folk spent over $1 trillion. And yet we still have so much poverty. And again, I'm talking about this because this is one industry that can help change or begin to change what is happening in our communities at the impoverished level, because the jobs are going to pay or can pay decent wages and sustainable decent wages. And maybe someone talked about, maybe else, someone talked about generational wealth. You can't create wealth unless you own something. So there's got to be owners, but also workers can make enough and plan enough so that you have, as the union wants to give, make sure you have a good retirement, make sure you have decent health benefits. I mean, we unfortunately in this nation have some of the sickest people on the planet, and yet we purport to be this advanced nation. And in theory, we could probably change all of that and really create a real healthy nation. But I'm sure some doctors who really want to help you, and I'm not talking about here in this room or tonight in Boston, but they may not find that so appealing. Because if people were healthy, there wouldn't be a need for so many doctors. There wouldn't be a need for so many hospitals. And now you can't find hospital beds right now. I mean, every hospital is full because we have all these diseases that exist, as opposed to figuring out how do we sustain our immune system. You're going to find out at some point that cannabis helps to bolster your immune system. And if your immune system is strong, all these diseases that exist, it's more difficult for them to inhabit and get in your body. Now, I'm talking about some of this I know, but I don't have the documentation to prove it, but the documentation is out there. So I just think our biggest issue is not just a dialogue, but to really come together and work to get the legislative process moving so that as licenses are able to be acquired, that also people are able to be engaged in the different divisions, the growing division. There's several of them. Again, I'm not an expert, so I don't know that, but I know there's several divisions where people can work and make a decent living. In the United States of America, everybody ought to be able to have a decent home. Now, a decent home could be just this little area here, the circumference of where this piece of quilt is, where it appears. It doesn't have to be a 10,000 or 20,000 square foot home. Some may have that, but many will not. Most of us will not have that. But yet we should have a decent home. We should have the best education on the planet in the United States. We should have health care that is beyond reproach. We should have a decent job, and we should have justice. And we know, that in our community, particularly in the Black and brown community, and in the poor white community, but particularly in the Black community, if you go down to any of these courthouses in America, where we have 13% of the population in the country, we're 60-70% of the jail population. So you go down there like Richard Pryor say, looking for justice, and all you find is just us. That has got to be changed. There's something wrong with the system that is preying on Black folk, Latino and Hispanic people, and poor white folk. That system is not equitable, and we must change that. Now, again, one of the ways you begin that process is look at this industry that is going to grow by leaps and bounds and figure out how can I get engaged and involved so I can help me, my family, and my community.
Next question is for Shalene. So you were a former commissioner of the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission, and you had mentioned any of the policies that you were putting in, or the commission was putting in, and making sure that workplace policies and racial equity were especially part of that conversation. So I'm just curious about your thoughts of some of the policies that are central to not only workers' rights that the commission could be working on or have worked on, and also could you talk a little bit about how the war on drugs shaped the conversation at the commission? Particularly how the war on drugs, race, and workers' rights are emboldened or part of the policies altogether.
If I may, I'd like to also change the topic and then come back.
I want to make sure that I talk about federal policy because when we were as a community writing these policies for Massachusetts that were focused on racial equity and workers' rights, we did that because, as many of you know, Massachusetts was the first state. We had to get it right. And I know that a lot of people in this room are responsible for that. I don't mean that figuratively like our community. I mean, literally, Shakia and all these people in this room were responsible not just for Massachusetts, but what the nation then followed to do, because you cannot have a cannabis law in this country without mentioning racial equity, and it started here. So we are well poised to lead the conversation on federal law as well. So since federally cannabis is illegal and that is going to change, the way that it changes and we get a national market is going to be a complete reset for equity, for labor rights, for everything. And so Mr. King said we all have to get on the same page when it comes to legislation. So if you came here ready to make a mental note, take a mental note on this. Interstate commerce. Right now we have dozens of individual state markets and they are going to transition to one national market. And what we can do if we all speak with one united voice is make sure that those policies that we have in Massachusetts are entrenched in the national market as well. So for example, when we started at the commission, we had to decide who are disproportionately harmed communities. We knew it was Black and Brown communities, but we had to make sure for constitutional reasons that we looked at data, that we looked at arrest rates, and we made sure that people specifically with convictions got these different types of benefits. But what we saw was that we weren't getting the results that we wanted to see. And so by continually bringing up, both at our meetings and in the public and in collaboration with the community, Shakia was a big part of this as well, we made sure that we kept making them more robust and more strong. So as many of you know, if you want to have a delivery license in Massachusetts, you must be designated as social equity or economic empowerment, somebody that was harmed by the war on drugs. What we could do at the federal level is decide that only businesses that are local mom and pops or unionized or social equity applicants, whatever designation we want to make, are able to participate in interstate commerce first. If we do that, we can completely change what the market looks like, and we can keep this from looking like every other industry that exploits workers, that is so focused on profit. And I'll close with this. Do you know which organization is the most engaged in lobbying for federal legalization right now? Yes and yes. So there's an organization backed by Big Tobacco that held a welcome to Congress reception last week. And they represented themselves as the cannabis activist community. And we all know what Big Tobacco does, right? If you want some nasty, mutant, chemical-laden, addictive, for-profit substance, then yeah, be okay with that. If you're not okay with that and you want what our cultures have done for thousands of years, then we need to all make sure we're on the same page and we are continuously underscoring these policies.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. Thank you, Shalene. That was a great answer. So again, like you said, let's start rallying around federal legalization, but we're going to shift gears a little bit here and talk to someone who owns a cannabis business and is a CEO in this industry and who touted that they pay their workers well. So get your applications in. And I'm going to ask the question to Brother Harrington, as Mr. King called him. And Mr. Harrington, as CEO of Viola, you've successfully built what we kind of coined here in the cannabis industry, a seed to sale empire. Do you think, from where you stand and from what you see in your CEO counterparts, that the industry overall is creating Black generational wealth, or is it not?
So far, it's not, right? I think the intention is there, but, you know, with social equity, there's a lot of problems with social equity. When you think about in different states, right, the requirements are all different. You know, it would be lovely if we could like all abide by the same rules, right? I think it would obviously make things a lot easier. But, you know, there's some states where I'm not considered social equity, right? Maybe because I wasn't from that community or all these different things, right? But when you think about some of the people that are getting the licenses in certain instances, it's very tough to back those businesses, right? Because if you give someone, it sucks, right? Because it's where the education comes in, right? You know, when I talk to a lot of the bigger MSOs, when they always ask what can they do, I'm like, you can educate, right? You can educate the people that are actually going for the licenses so that when they do get the license, they can be successful. A lot of people, when they get these licenses, they have no idea what to do with them. They have no idea how to operate them, you know, understand the importance of, you know, compliance and regulations and all these different things that are constantly always changing. I think about just with my story, right? And obviously I had tons of resources, but the first attorney that I hired to help me navigate my first license and everything, literally everything he told me was the wrong thing to do, right? But thank God I know how to read and understand for myself that, you know, when he tells me something, I do the research and like, that doesn't make sense, you know? So education is so important because, you know, to me, what equity means is equity, right? It is ownership. It is the opportunity to change not only your life and your family's life, but also your community. But if you give me an opportunity and I don't know what to do with it, what am I going to end up doing? Selling it for pennies on the dollar. It's never the intent is never met, right? So that's why, you know, even with me, I have Harrington Institute. You know, I started my own little school because so many people are always reaching out to me asking for advice, and I can't, you know, talk to everybody every day. Let me start this school, right? It's a non-elite course where, you know, it just gives people a baseline, fundamental information about all the different verticals in the space. You know, I can't remember right now, I'm sorry. 15? No? Candy time. How about this? Like what you said, you know, get into the cannabis space doesn't mean there has to be a license to cultivate. You know, there's testing, there's manufacturing, there's marketing, there's packaging, there's media, there's so many different ways that you can have an impact and participate in this industry moving forward. So, you know, to the point of like, you know, I'm just gonna be honest, I've been in this 11 years. So I've seen the ups and downs and rounds. And, you know, for the last 18 months, you know, the industry has been somewhat, it's like not gonna say downward spiral, but it's been very like steady, right? And, you know, the reason because of that is because when you talk about the lawmakers, sometimes they're not really taking into account like some of the decisions that they're making is gonna have an impact on the industry, right? Like, why would you open up a state of Oklahoma to unlimited licenses when there's only 3 million people that live there, right? So you got thousands of cultivations with 3 million people that live there, right? So now, all these businesses that have started, you know, they over commoditize, the price of weed goes to zero, and then that's where you put these businesses in tough positions to be able to pay good wages. Like, how am I gonna pay a good wage when my business not making no money now? You know? So it's so many levels, and to the point, like, this plant is very political, right? And that's why we all, especially all of us that are in it, we have to figure out a way to come together and kind of have one voice and one message and one goal and initiative to push. Because I've been on a bunch of panels all over the country, and honestly, you get on them and you see people have all these different perspectives, and that's honestly the reason what's holding us back as an industry from really truly moving forward. You know, to me, it's always like what's right is right. I don't get how all these other things creep in, right? So, you know, at the end of the day, to your point, it's still on the ground level. You know, states like Massachusetts, being that they don't have a lot of licenses, you know, it does create more opportunity. I would tell all of us, you know, all of you guys, if someone is, you know, trying to pitch you on Oklahoma or Oregon, run. You know what I'm saying? But I still hear people like, yo, I'm about to build this big grow in Oregon. And I'm like, why? You know? But, you know, at the end of the day, it's still a lot of fun, still, you know, unbelievable opportunities, but I would definitely look at other ways that you can have an impact besides just thinking that, you know, cultivation is the way.
Other Want to build on that a little bit, and in your position as a CEO and hiring and recruiting, how do you feel about unionization, and would you be willing to sit with a union like the USCW and talk about getting your workers unionized if they're not already?
Yeah, I'm open to it. Like at the end of the day, I always treat my employees right. You know, all my employees all have health insurance. You know, I've always done all that stuff, right, since the beginning. And I think it's probably just because of my background playing in the NBA first and understanding like that's how real businesses are run, you know? And, you know, when I first got into this whole thing, you know, from USCW and talking to Marvin about it, I didn't realize that there were so many people that were still being affected by things like this, right? Because I've always operated my business like this, you know what I'm saying? So, you know, this is something that's super duper important. And, you know, I just think about like the way that my employees' lives have changed. You know, I've had employees that literally used to ride their bike to work to next, you know, they come with a car and they tell me they just got in their own apartment, right? Just last night, you know, I was in Detroit with my growth staff, and, you know, we had some new hires recently, and, you know, two of the guys sat there and talked to me for 45 minutes, looking me dead in my eyes, just talking about how, like, this opportunity to save their lives, you know what I'm saying? So, for me, you know, being an owner and operator and extremely involved, you know, down from my chief, you know, my C-suite all the way down to the guy that's, you know, trimming, you know, it just really feels good, you know, to be able to just help people and impact people's lives at that level. You know, that you talk about from a job standpoint, and obviously from the plant, you know, we're seeing all the many lives that, you know, I've seen cannabis change, you know, from my grandmother, you know, who suffered from glaucoma, tried cannabis, and, you know, hour and a half later downstairs reading a Bible crying, to, you know, the first patient I ever had. You know, the guy had 120 tumors on his lungs. They gave him 6 months to live, and we made something at that time called Rick Simpson oil, and it's still called Rick Simpson oil, but, you know, gave it to him. He lived 2.5 years, and every tumor, you know, was off of his lung, and that's all he did was use cannabis. So, like, that's just the power of this plant that we're really sitting here talking about. And it's such a good thing that now we get a chance to talk about it in this type of an open forum, you know, that now we can all tell our stories. You know, I think everybody in this room probably has, especially if you love cannabis, has a story like this about themselves or a family member. So I'm just happy that now we have these platforms to continue to talk about it, and that's something I'm going to continue to do, is try to change the stigma, but also be the bridge to opportunity and try to just create, you know, and try to continue to uplift, empower, and educate people of color, so that then we can figure out a way to take advantage of this opportunity and have a real seat at the table.
I want to go to Candy now. Candy, so much of your work at Weedmaps and also some of the work that you've been doing as the head of TEAL, T-E-A-L, which is Together for Equity, Access, and Legalization, is about healing and using this industry as a way to heal. Specifically, Weedmaps released a policy paper that explores how to build an equitable cannabis industry that corrects the harms of the past, creates opportunities for those harmed by prohibition, and invests in the communities devastated by the war on drugs or prohibition policies. So Weedmaps is already leading in that sense of healing and creating an infrastructure, actually. Not only are you mapping ways for opportunities for people to go and purchase and partake, but also how to help make sure that it's not an exploitative, harmful industry that many are populated in our communities. They take more than they give, and they harm more than they ever will. But this is a wonderful way, I think, of turning that on its head as this industry emerges. So talk to us about the healing and also growing in this industry.
I love that question, thank you. So I think one thing that's important is that this plant is medicine, and that's how legalization started, is because it is medicine. And oftentimes with adult use legalization, we forget about the patient. And so prioritizing patient access and patient rights is still important, whether it's recreational, adult use, whatever terms we're using. I don't know what you guys use in Massachusetts, sorry. But adult use, a lot of times the patient is left behind and they get stuck paying these extremely high taxes, and it's just not affordable for them.
So making sure that we have programs to assist with medicine for those that need it, veterans, definitely, there's a lot of organizations out there. And supporting these organizations nationwide is really important because I don't think that they get enough funding to do the work that they're doing. So a lot of times corporations like Al's Corporation, like Weedmaps, the companies that have more money to be able to spread that money around to these organizations and help from the patient level to education level, whatever it is that we need to help with, we need to do the work to do it. And I feel like every company in this industry needs to put that at top of mind because we're in a business that is now a business that's still a plan that many people are still in jail for. So we feel we have to have that, like, if you don't feel that, like, every day, like, I need to do something. If I'm making money off this industry, I need to do something. And I feel like every company should be obligated to do something, whether it's with patients, whether it's with education, with any nonprofits in the space. I think that's one of the most important things we can do. When I originally launched Teal at Weedmaps, I thought we were going to do a nonprofit. I thought we were going to go that route, but I realized that there were already so many wonderful nonprofits, and most of them are headed up by women of color. And so supporting those organizations was something that was really important to me, and we kind of flipped that to make sure that we're trying to help with our resources, whatever it is that we have as a company that we can offer in kind. It's important, and I think that every company has something. Even if you're just starting a committee within your company that is like, hey, we're gonna volunteer with this nonprofit this month, and then everybody just utilizes whatever. We have so many talented people at Weedmaps. We're a technology company, and we have so many people who are willing to help with like website services for these nonprofits. Whatever it is that they have that's a skill set, they wanna use that and donate their time and skill sets to people. So I think just providing that space for your employees to do, for you to do, and actually going into these communities and helping in any ways that you can. If you have the money, awesome, everybody needs money. But if you don't have the money, you still have resources, you still have a body that you can help other people with. So that's kind of where Teal came in to Weedmaps, and that was about 4 years ago now.
I'm gonna jump in here and I'm gonna ask my question to Roz, but first I wanna acknowledge that Katie raised a good point, that usually in these conversations, we completely silo and kind of forget about the medicinal aspect of it. When we're talking about equity, it's all recreational or adult use focused, and medicinal just becomes this back burner. And so on that topic, speaking to Roz, as a founder and CEO of Minorities for Medical Marijuana, which is the largest cannabis nonprofit, what do you do and how do you use your platform to have that larger dialogue, one around social equity, representation in the cannabis workforce, workers' rights, and then kind of like in the medicinal space, because it's not really talked about a lot, what does equity look like?
Thank you for that question, first and foremost. My background prior to starting M4MM, I spent almost 20 plus years in healthcare. And I spent a lot of time studying the lack of health opportunity for people of color, especially at Black and Brown community, meaning access to a physician, access to medicine, utilizing the ER for a point of primary care versus for emergency care. And everything you saw from a health equity perspective outside of cannabis is also the same thing that we're seeing in cannabis. So when I started M4MM, the whole goal was to be a community-based organization, to be focused on the needs of the community, to create an infrastructure, create a home that you can trust. That, and I, you know, some people have an issue with when I named it Minorities for Medical Marijuana. Well, I was looking at like down the road, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, as a nonprofit, how do I get funding for this? Well, I knew that the federal government and how they fund different projects are based on demographics. It's the minority community. So I call myself looking and trying to read the tea leaves as to what was going on. And so to answer your question, the first part of it is that the goal of the organization is looking at how do we serve the community. And serving the community is not just social equity. You will be surprised. There are a lot of folks that have been incarcerated, that they've paid the price of the war on drugs, but they have no desire, they have no willingness, they do not want to be in our industry. They just want to have their record clear and not have that scarlet letter on their chest, feeling like when they go get housing, they get turned down because they have something spot in their record, right? And so we need to, we as cannabis advocates, we get on our high horse and we want to fight for this and fight for this. And what I try to do is every day I say, Lord, keep me humble and make sure I help people. And that means you have to listen to the people, listen to the community. What do they need? What are your needs are? Where's your gap? Where's your education gap? What do you need to know? Let me help you decipher. So we run about 10 community-based programs: Latinx outreach, veterans outreach. We have a social cannabis brand. We have a program that's for expungement called Project Clean Slate. We have a program that's for HBCU students that is about Ready, Set, Grow, how to enter the industry, what to do. So I run about 10 programs in 27 different states. Going back to the second part of your question, from the health equity, let me tell you something. I am concerned about the cannibalization of the medical market and the medical patient as we see legalization happen. My son has sickle cell anemia. I'm a sickle cell mom. And the reason why I started M4MM is because I have a 17-year-old son that was born in and out of the hospital that literally I felt like cannabis could eventually be a support for him. And now I will tell you that Brian is now 24 years old, in pharmacy school to be a pharmacist, and he's a card-carrying medical marijuana patient. We discuss cannabis as a normality in our household. Not only that, when creating M4MM, when I first created, you had so many people, friends, who abandoned the friendship. Now I beat them off with a stick. Roz, let me talk to you. Can I talk to you? But it's a good thing because the normalization of this plant starts with us being able to say, you don't have to be in the closet, you don't have to hide. So the equity part, the one thing that I'm super proud of what the organization is doing right now, and we started in 2022, and we've hosted over 12 different clinics. We've gone to places like Miami, Tallahassee, Orlando, Philadelphia, St. Louis, Missouri, Baltimore. I mean, we've done these clinics, they're called Las Vegas. Safe access. Safe access means that if we go into communities, low-income patients, veterans, who literally are saying, I want to get my card, but I don't have a physician. I don't know how to go about getting it done. So we go out there, we educate them on what it takes to get your card, and we pay for that first physician encounter, because that's the most expensive part when you're trying to get your card. And we educate them on when you go to a dispensary. First and foremost, they better treat you with respect. Because we see too many people, especially from our communities, they're not treated with respect when they walk in the dispensary. They're blown off, or you know what you want, or no, you're treated with respect because you're a patient. And so that is from a health equity perspective. The safe access clinics, we served over 300 patients in 1 year. 1 year doing it. These are patients who would not have had access to their medical card, who now say, I feel safer. My son was stopped by the police. That's a whole nother story. About 3 months ago, smelled cannabis in his car, asked me if he had marijuana in his car. My son said, yes, I do, sir. I just left the dispensary. Now, I don't know if he was probably maybe, if he had been consuming in his car or what happened, but he got stopped for the tail light. Long story short, the first thing he said to the officer is, I'm a medical patient. I'm on the phone listening as Brian is talking to the officer, scared shitless, excuse my language, but I was scared because I was like, this could go from 0 to 100 real quick. The officer gave him respect because Brian said, sir, I'm a medical patient. And the officer said, let me see your card. And I heard Brian say, here's my card. He takes his card, he takes his driver's license, he goes, checks it. The whole time I'm on the phone with Brian, he comes back to the car. He says, sir, you checked out. It looks like your prescription is expired, but your card is valid. We are still trying to figure this out as law enforcement, but thank you for being cooperative. You can go on about your way, right? So this is so important. Even in a state like Massachusetts that is adult use, if you are a patient, and 9 times out of 10, 80% of us are patients, get your card, have protection. So if you do get stopped, if you do get someone that's being aggressive, that you have something that says, I'm a patient, leave me alone. This is my medicine. Thank you.
Thank you.
we go into the next question, I just want to highlight something that you said about your son Brian being pulled over. And we just said it when we talk about legalization, we focus on the recreational aspects, but medical marijuana was a criminal justice issue as well. When people were being incarcerated or stopped and their livelihoods changed forever and still being changed right now, they weren't making a differential between if it was your medicine or not. So that was a great point to bring up, and I think we should all keep that in mind.
I wanted to turn over to UFCW, specifically, Mark, and I wanted to ask you some questions about the unionization, and now that UFCW has led the charge in organizing workers across the cannabis industry, working to ensure cannabis jobs are good jobs and good union jobs at that. Why is it not only so important to set a high standard for those jobs at the very onset in this industry, and what's at stake for workers without them? Specifically, I also want to know, what pushback are you getting with being in this industry? We talked about stigma, right? So this is such an aggressive, wonderful move from UFCW to be in this industry and to stake its claim, but it's also an industry filled with stigma.
So for UFCW as a whole, this industry, the stigma is real. Where when the Trump administration was in and we were organizing cannabis, the fear was always in all of our locals' head that Jeff Sessions, who hated cannabis, was going to come and raid a union and shut it down because it's federally illegal. Jeff Sessions was openly anti-cannabis, and so you had this concern. So while you're going around organizing workers trying to make their lives better, you know at any moment the federal government under a different administration can always come and arrest you, shut down the union, and they can do it because on many levels, if it's a Republican administration, in a lot of places, UFCW is not their greatest friend. So they can win twice over. They get to keep wages low, and they get to get rid of an opponent. And one of the big things around this whole industry, the dangers of it are open, and then as you're representing workers, other folks look at you and say, wait, do your workers just smoke? They just want to use it to get high. They're not using it for medical reasons because a lot of it started in the medical space. And we're like, no, these are real jobs. The workers, they may use it all the time, but they're trained people. They know what to do, You have people who can tell you, oh, you have this condition, take it, like these are professionals. Take this type of, take this strain, use this. And but the stigmas around the job, the stigmas around the fear that the government can come get you, the stigmas around it's a cash business because it's not regulated. So is someone going to come in and kill it? Like there are so many layers to it. And the biggest fear, to pivot to it earlier that I want to touch, is the biggest fear for the equity market and for the workers that is federal legalization the way it's going. One of the biggest advocates for federal full legalization is John Boehner. For folks who don't know, he is the former Republican Speaker of the House. He wants federal legalization so badly. And a lot of you ask, why does a Republican want it? Because for the equity market and for the workers, what happens is, if you know, a lot of tobacco and growing happens in the South. So all these good jobs, what they want is to take every good job, and the high-paying jobs in Boston, Massachusetts, and any state are the grow jobs. They want to move all the grow to the South, and then just leave the retail jobs here. And so I might own a retail establishment, but I'm buying everything from the South, and they keep raising the prices. So those jobs in South Carolina and Arkansas are non-union. They keep raising the price, so I have to pay less in order to make a profit. So the big fear for us as a union, the big fear for equity owners in different states is how federal legalization happens, because that can really change everything. And for the union, the reason we want to partner with employers in states is we can all work together to fight that. So it's not just we're fighting for good jobs for our members. We're fighting to make sure you guys can create good jobs in the state. It's a mutual beneficial relationship because we all know that labor, people in Black and brown communities don't have all the power. But if we join together and fight in this industry, especially this new industry, we can make sure that for the long term, this industry, if not all industries, are at least benefiting everyone, from equity owners to the workers.
Hello, Boston. Y'all look good tonight. The good brother Tito. You've really been at the forefront of a lot of things in our city around this issue and many issues, especially representing rocks. As CEO of Apex Noir Cannabis, you are one of the select few Black operators. How can the UFCW support the efforts of Black and brown operators proactively, even before they get to the point of unionization? And are there equity programs to further the cause of ownership for our people?
One, two. Okay. Thank you so much, Sister Janae. And thank you for regularly making sure that our voice is heard and seen in the newspaper. And thank you for that question. And I think, as the brother just brought up, I think it's so important that we realize there are so many aspects of this where we all benefit. And you just brought up a really important piece. So if interstate commerce happened just like any other space, one of my friends, former colleague, was a city council. Now she's the first Black woman in the state Senate who has to deal with budgets on a regular basis. One of the issues that she would have to deal with is the fact that the $250 million that they collected last year, if there's interstate commerce, right? So you got the South, but then you also got the West. There's a whole coast of a place called California, and you can grow stuff outside and the like. And Oregon, where per pound, I don't know what it is now, but $300-400 a pound. All of the revenue, that 250 million, much of that goes away, right? Because then in a place like Boston, on a day like today, and Brother Al, we kept it just rain, not all the sleet and snow, but normally this time of year it's really, really cold. That really becomes an issue. And it also would really devalue the business that I built. One of the other areas that I think is frankly a really big issue, let's just keep it 100, this tax code called 280E, right? So cannabis is in the same category as heroin and LSD, right? And I feel really weird saying that with Brother King on stage. Just so, I feel weird about that. But we are in that same category. So what does that mean from a tax basis side? Our average federal tax is about 50%. And so that component and that actually single piece of taking it out of Schedule 1 and deregulating it would have a benefit and actually would benefit the industry as a whole, and the dollars that we're talking about for those folks who saying I can't, and Brother Al, you had it right. We pay our workers well. We do the right thing around benefits. We have a first, last, and security program where we try to help people move. Some of the work that my colleague Lydia Edwards did on the city council was really around affordable housing. The average 2 bedrooms is $2,800 in the city of Boston, so that's a big issue. So there's a lot that we have to do with that connection. The last piece, though, is around that equity funds, right? And so that's a huge issue. So the average dispensary in the state of Massachusetts, it costs at least $1 million to start. dispensary. My name is Tito Jackson, but I'm the one from Boston. Not the brother from Gary, Indiana. So not that brother. So I and Al would beat me in ball. We might play some football together. Yeah. So when it comes down to it, the resources to open this stuff. And in Boston, that means holding a building for at least a year. There's a lot there, and making sure that states that are collecting these tax dollars put those tax dollars back into Black and brown businesses in order to make sure that they are solvent and that they can grow and that they can scale and grow up and be strong enough to do the right thing. And actually, I'm sorry, you don't have to wait to do the right thing. We should all be doing the right thing relative to the pay, the benefits, and making sure that the folks, because the real part of the business, let's keep it 100, are the workers who are there on a day-to-day basis, opening the store, closing the store, and helping our patients and customers as they do the work. So we are united in that, and we need to continue to have each other's back.
And staying united in that, and Brother Harrington, you can chime in alongside Tito. I know both of you talk about paying your workers well and keeping everything in alignment, but how can you work alongside USCW to kind of flip the narrative that some other owners have, whereas they think unions and equity is hurting their company's bottom line? How can you work with the USCW to kind of help show people that this is actually good for companies, protecting your workers, creating pay equity, making economic justice a viable, relevant, constant conversation is important?
Was that okay. I think one of the things that we can do, one, is be successful. Be successful in showing that doing right by our workers, paying folks more than a minimum wage and not having them living from paycheck to paycheck is a successful business model. And I'm betting that we're going to kick other people's butts in terms of our actual sales and our outcomes. That is a critical component. But also, I've been to the State House a couple of times. I've been to City Hall a couple of times. So, we should be, in particular on these kind of macro issues, there are conversations that we, really need to have. And one of the conversations that we need to have is, as an equity license holder in the state of Massachusetts, I have to have, and I want to have, and actually I do have, over 51% of my workers who are people of color. In fact, over 90% of my workers are people of color. We pushed out and we had over 160 people apply, and over 80% of them were people of color. So we're being deliberate in that. But you know what? You know who doesn't need to do that? Our MSOs. They have no requirements relative to who they hire, who they do business. What's that? Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm in here speaking cannabis rhymes. Multi-state operators. So what ends up happening is there are people who figure this thing out. And by the way, just because they're multi-state doesn't mean they're smart. And by the way, if you look at the stock market, just because they're multi-state doesn't mean they're even making money. Let's keep it 100 when it comes to that. But what they aren't required to do is they aren't required to hire Black and brown folks. And frankly, and to your point, they don't. So 17% is the national average. So remember I said we had a 300% higher chance of getting arrested for possession, or 700% higher chance of getting arrested for distribution. So hold on, when it's legal, we don't know how to sell weed anymore? I'm just asking right now. Right? So,
that's the shortage,
when it
right?
becomes legal, we just suddenly said we don't know how to sell weed anymore. And that's a critical component. And I look up to Al a lot. Actually, physically, I look up to Al. But we don't have, he is an anomaly. We don't have that. And as we said, multi-state operators, right? He's international now, so he's in some other places, 011 or whatever. But when it comes down to it, it's only him, right? And so that speaks to the difficulties in this space as a whole, and it also speaks to how we can work together. And I really appreciate you pressing us on this, Sister Janae. We have to work together, or we won't win. They'll win, but we won't win.
And to this point, until we're really into the industry, I don't think it'll ever be what it can truly be, right? I was on the board of a company called MedMen, who I'm sure a lot of people know of, and I did it as a favor for somebody, right? So whatever I did it, and I was on a lot of calls, and I would hear them talk about the LVMH of weed. Like, we're doing a deal with this company, the LVMH of weed. So I'm like, damn, who's the LVMH of weed? I've been in this shit for I've been in this for a minute. And I'm just like, who's the LVMH of weed? And they finally said the name. I'm not gonna say the name, and poop on the name, but I looked them up, and they would know LVMH of weed. And when I think about the LVMH of weed, it's like I think about our community, right? I think about some of the the brands that are now starting to get into the industry, like the Runts of the world and the Gumbos of the world. And those guys could literally take the same weed that LVMH company processed and grew, and they could just market a bag that goes with that weed and sell that weed for $7,000 a pound. You know what I'm saying? So we are this is our industry. You know what I mean? And to this point, we got to just figure out how are we gonna really work together to get our seat at the table, as I keep mentioning. And I just feel like the time is coming. We have to continue to, like I said, lock arms. And until once we do that, and continue to push, what you got going on, because I'm not the only one, right? There's definitely other Black cannabis companies that are doing their thing, but obviously I just have a platform that a lot of them don't have. But with me having this platform, I'm going to continue to use it in this way and continue to just encourage us to keep putting one foot in front of the other, keep believing, and eventually we're going to get there.
One last piece. Every single person who has a marijuana charge or conviction in the whole United States, but in the state of Massachusetts, but across the country, should have those expunged from their record immediately.
And I was gonna go back to Brother Jackson's point that for the conversation of the union, right? And you guys protecting workers, being able to make sure you have wages, not just livable, but to be able to thrive, right? And then you have all these advocacy groups. One of the main points that he mentioned was 280E. 280E is such a powerful detriment to our industry right now. It does not allow you to even absorb the cost of having employees. And that is a main thing. So we have to find issues that are policy related and work together. Even though you guys are focused on USCW, you have your mission, my M4MM has its mission. There are some very key things that are critical to our industry that if were lifted or were softened would change the opportunity for Al, for Tito, for any business owner who owns a operator to be able to make sure they live up to the promise. Because the one thing about the unions, had it not been for New Jersey, had it not been for Massachusetts is unionized, right? Is Mass unionized? Right. I just remember New Jersey because when they first started doing the medical and you had to get your application, the number one thing they had to do was go find a local union that would support your application. And it made people, let me tell you something, I was there in 2018 and it made people stand up, and I was working with the big MSOs and they were running around like chickens trying to find a union to figure out, I'm telling you, I was there to figure out how do we, what do you guys want? And it doesn't have to be an adversarial relationship, but if you get policy that's put into place that supports our issues, collectively, we all win.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was important to add on. I want to circle back to what Brother Harrison said about locking arms, because I can't think of no better person to tie this conversation up with when we're talking about locking arms than Brother Michael Curry, who snuck on stage to join us. You are a national board member and regional administrator for the NAACP's New England Area Conference. The NAACP supports the Safe Passage Act. How do they envision mobilizing their communities and branches in the region to support efforts to unite cannabis workers?
Thank you for being here. I'm going to start with something funny. When I walked in, my good friend, formerly at UCLU, Hassan Hall, said, "You're late, that's why you get the hard seat." So apologies for being late this evening. And again, pleasure to join Mr. King twice in 1 week after the Embrace Boston unveiling. So I'm reminded of a few things. So one, to the sister's comment a few minutes ago about the tie to this conversation around the health equity conversation. I believe, just like Massachusetts passed health reform, that then became Obamacare or ACA, and then spread across the country, we have an opportunity here to lead the health equity reform movement. So what people may not know is, because it's brewing behind the scenes, yesterday there was a health equity reform bill filed in Massachusetts that Black and Latinx leaders worked over the last year to craft legislation to move Massachusetts so we are no longer weathered to the fact that we live sicker and die younger than white Americans. We've gotten weathered to that. So when you go to your reunions, Auntie Nem, Uncle Nem, Grandma, you may not see them again at the next reunion. We're used to that. And we should never have been used to that. We're used to the fact that when we're in pain, we don't have access to the medications we need because we can't afford it. And then we've been incarcerated disparately for use of cannabis, use of marijuana. So, I'm honored in the role that I have on the national board that I get to chair the National Board's Advocacy and Policy Committee. I've been on the board since 2014. So the 64-member board, we have many committees, and one of those is the Advocacy and Policy Committee. And that committee in 2019 advanced a resolution, which was passed to support the decriminalization of possession of cannabis and regulation of medical and adult use cannabis industry. And then reaffirmed that in 2021 through the committee that I chair, the economic equality and support of cannabis industry, which is reaffirmed again what I said previously, and look for demanding that African American ownership and employment opportunities in the cannabis industry be promoted. So it's interesting when I think about all my years on national board, we've evolved as a Black people, as people about this issue of cannabis. Because I remember the first conversation on the board when this came up, it was a generational divide. Many of the older Black folks was like, no, drugs, war on drugs, keep the crimes out of my neighborhood. And many of the Black folks, the younger Black folks at the table, like myself and others who were younger than me, said, well, this is not new. White folks have been doing weed for a long time. And people started to share stories of how, and I'm from Roxbury, from Lenox Street, right down the street, how my friends who I grew up with went to jail for what those classmates in college did freely in the dorm room. So I think this movement has happened around the NAACP. We've evolved in this. And I think to your question, I think we have an opportunity with organized labor. This week, Brother King, I was at SYU 1199 as a keynote speaker for their gathering. And you'll appreciate this. I started with Dr. King, Martin Luther King. 1968, April, gave a speech, one of his many speeches called The Other America. And if you've never listened to that speech, read the speech, you need to read the speech. I think one of the things that's about Dr. King and his speeches is that they're as relevant today as they were in the 1960s. So he runs down this list of things that Black folks were experiencing in the 1960s. Poverty rate, I think, was in the 19% plus in the 1965. Black men, women couldn't find jobs. Health disparities. We were dying and sicker of almost every disease I can name today, then and now. And his point about the other America is he juxtaposed where most of, or many of white America live, not all of, but some of white America live, against where too many Black folks live. So I started that to say, he gave that speech in 1968 at SEIU 1199. And he started that speech by saying, I'm an 1199er. So when I think about the role of the NAACP with organized labor is one, it's been said, fair wages, job opportunities. How do we move people from poverty to the middle class, to wealth, to building wealth? And I'm excited that we're working with organizations and look forward to this evolution with your union to figure out how we can move this conversation around cannabis so we don't miss the next opportunity. Because just like, and I'll say it to Tito, because I know he's all over this stuff around climate change too. All this money going into climate, sustainability and climate change and alternative energy, by the time we blink, they're going to be billionaires and millionaires, and we will have missed that train too. So there's an opportunity here to really lock arms, as has been said, with civil rights organizations, community-based organizations, and say, how do we make sure brothers and sisters who want to enter this industry have the investment, the capital to grow, are not facing regulations that disadvantage them in the marketplace and in business? And then on the social justice side, how do we get all the brothers and sisters out of jail? Because the reality is, the fact that we're sitting here, every time I sit in there, and I did a CBC conversation on this, every time I sit in this conversation, I get irritated because we talk about business. And I'm like, yo, all them cats sitting in jail right now, right? I can't have this conversation without also wanting to say, this movement needs to be trying to get them out of jail. Those brothers and sisters. So, I am a student listening to many of you who are starting these businesses, who are engaged in this work. I want to make sure that we as a national NAACP will be here in July when 7,000 to 10,000 Black and brown folks will come to Boston to convene at the national convention here. This, I hope, will be part of those conversations we have around this community, around how we as a community are engaging in cannabis and what the National Association do to support that effort.
Thank you so much for those powerful words and call to action. I believe at this time we have some special guests coming to the stage.
Yes, thank you, everyone. How does everyone feel about the panel conversation? Honestly, absolutely great stuff, and we are wrapping up. And quickly, we just want to thank all of our moderators and our panelists for joining us today, from flying out from everywhere you came from, being intentional. Mr. Taylor, I'd like to thank you too for coming and re-inspiring us to continue the work that your family's legacy has started and that we want to see here in the industry. I hope everyone's walked away with the understanding that cannabis doesn't exist without the people in the actual shops doing the work and protecting them and making sure it's there. So with that, we do have some special guests. I would like to introduce Rashad Lambert, the Senior Vice President from Forbes. And he's gonna bring up someone who has a very interesting story about trying to form a union and being, what is it, fired quietly. Firing quietly, quiet firing. We're gonna learn about that in a second, Rashad.
Good evening. Are y'all awake? Good evening. I just want to make sure that y'all can hear me. I don't want to talk to myself, and I can't really talk that loud. I lost my voice a little bit, but also I'm gonna tell you how I got my voice back. And it's also related to what we are discussing, how I'm able to speak now. I had dental surgery last week. And in the midst of having that dental surgery, of course, right afterwards, they started telling me all of the opiates that they wanted me to take. And like, oh, we'll give you this, and you'll be fine. I'm not a big fan of taking pills. I don't really like it. So I decided to call some of my friends. And I said, listen, I need something, but I don't want to take this. Like, I don't want to take this stuff. I've seen what happens to people when they got extreme pain. And I was able to go into one of the shops in Pennsylvania, Philly. Sorry, I know y'all like the subject. And I was able to get something that is really because of one of my friends that works in the shop and is a blood tender. So before I start, I just wanted to please give a round of applause to all of our panelists and all of our esteemed guests. Please give yourselves a round of applause for showing up and for being here for the right cause and for the right purpose, because without y'all being here, this doesn't mean the same. And then lastly, but last but not least, of course, can we give a warm round of applause to of the Roxbury Community College for hosting us here. And a special shout out to Marvin Bean, wherever he is, the organizer. All right, so now that y'all answered, sorry, I just wanted to click a little bit. My name is Rashad Lambert. I'm the Senior Vice President of Forbes and I'm the founder of an organization called Forbes the Culture. Forbes the Culture is a community for Black professionals and Black entrepreneurs to share resources, pool resources, and to work together. Essentially, we're directly mission aligned with UFCW. We're all here in support of workers' right to unionize, full stop. More specifically, in this case, cannabis workers, those who fill every essential role for the proper cultivation, packaging, and distribution of cannabis. In the case of our bud tenders, like bartenders, their role runs the gamut of like medical professional, salesperson, therapist, expert, they do it all for those who need to be guided. Now, of course, it's safe to say that I'm familiar with the legacy market, as I said, I'm from Philadelphia. And I often think about if those people who we mentioned that are incarcerated, that are currently incarcerated, if legalization came sooner and their workers were able to unionize, what would the market look like now? But oftentimes when people do attempt to unionize, there are other ways that you say union busting and all these other things. I have the pleasure of introducing, as well as you'll have the pleasure of hearing the story of someone who has been a victim of a popular topic, as they mentioned, quiet firing. One of the many microaggressions that workers experience when they're attempting to unionize and expose the unfair labor practices of their employees. So please give another warm round of applause. I know I asked y'all to clap. Start clapping already. Please start clapping now. Please give another warm round of applause to Harry Jock, who's going to share his story.
Appreciate you. Hello, everybody. I'm Harry Jean-Jacques, founder of the Big O Project. Thank you all for joining me tonight. I want to give you a little bit of my background. Me and my brother, Jean-Jacques, we're a co-founder of the Big O Project, a 501c3 nonprofit. We're from the best part of Boston, Dorchester, and we're founded to create equity for Black people disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. And before, not even before, while creating this organization, only 1 year old, and we created a lot of impact. But while creating our organization, I've been a part of the legacy market my whole life. I could shake a pound in a week, by myself. And then, after legalization, me and the community were really, really happy. We're like, oh, wow, we're about to be rich. We're already doing it, and then we had a rude awakening, and then we figured out we had to organize. And part of that organization would be getting educated. As such, I joined a MSO, multi-state operator, entry level, even though I was more qualified than everybody there. And after a while, I began to realize that they're all full of crap in terms of equity and enriching the community. As such, we had no other alternative but to organize. I reached out to the UFC, whatever, I don't remember the name, but the local, and we formed a partnership in organizing and for union. We got very, very close. Unfortunately, a couple of people involved couldn't, keep their mouth shut, and corporate got a hold of it. Mind you, they never ever cared about anything we did. All of a sudden, the CEO was having a town hall meeting. He was taking people, behind closed doors to pretty much grill them, which I thought was kind of illegal, but they got away with it. Long story short, they systematically fired everyone for minor, inconveniences. They really, really, to me, dismantled that movement. They did a lot. Pardon me. Pretty much we were organizing for a few things that we thought, in the latest industry of cannabis would be a given, but, we didn't get. A livable wage. They were making millions of dollars while we were getting paid barely over, minimum wage. We wanted a clear pathway to leadership because, as you know, they do whatever they want. People like me who were way overqualified were being passed over for our white counterparts who never even smoked a joint. But because they looked how they looked and we looked how we looked, we were looked over. Third thing would be leadership to actually be reflective of, Black people disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs who are experts. They had a problem with all of that. And again, they literally made it very inhospitable, whether they fired you outright or had harsh working conditions, which you could, Google the term called quiet firing. So basically, they're not going to fire you, but they're going to do everything in their everything they can get away with to make your life hell. Whether that be, cutting your hours to barely like 5-10 hours a week, harassment, over policing of random things. Again, like 80% of the people who were trying to unionize either quit or got fired because of, what they were doing. So I think today we all have to, be aware of that going forward. I applaud everybody here for doing what they're doing. I really appreciate that, but we have to literally, going forward, understand that organization is key, organization is freedom. If we don't all work together in terms of creating a new path forward for equity and generational wealth for, Black and Latino people, which is disproportionately affected by the war on drugs, what we're really talking about. So again, I'm just here to support and share my experience with that. But, I commend everybody in the room. I commend the organization. I commend the union. Big shout out to Marvin and everybody else here. And again, look out for a Big Old Project. We're on every platform: LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, bigoldproject.org. And if you really care about equity, you'll support us because we're doing the work no one else wants to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Harry. And like you said, definitely look out, reach out to try to support. At this time, we'll take a couple audience questions if there are any prior to wrapping. And if you have a question, just raise your hand and I'll bring the mic over. Test.
Peace to the room. I am very grateful to be here in the omnipresence of us all, and also you, Mr. King, because as a student and natural person from Massachusetts State, I learned a lot about your father, and I'm also a son of a widow, so to see your parents memorialized on Boston Common is bittersweet. While $10 million was used to create that bronze sculpture, it also represents two kings represented without a crown. While, Sir Miles Standish, whose broadsword is represented on his Commonwealth's flag, his monument is still in Duxbury, even though he killed many American Indians. And as such, he was struck by lightning in 1922, but re-erected by his Commonwealth. But I'm still grateful to be here, nonetheless. But my question is, I hear a lot of you using the terminology black and brown, which to me sounds like algorithm, which doesn't reflect the truth about the paper genocide which occurred to the original American Indians of this Turtle Island. So when you're talking about the 13th Amendment and all these incarcerated Negroes and Blacks, where did this all begin, and how will we remedy the faulty foundations of this corporation posing as a nation? How?
Very briefly, obviously there's no way we can answer that completely and totally, but I can speak to one aspect of one way in which we have tried to rectify that. I want to give credit to my former colleague who represented District 7, Kim Janey, who came up with the Boston licensing system here and specifically shouted out as a preference our indigenous peoples to make sure that they are given a license before anyone else, making sure that they are part of that conversation, and her licensing structure and what she did for the city of Boston also created an equity fund for those who are BIPOC, indigenous, to access this. No, it does not resolve the entire universe of oppression that you just brought up. I just am giving you an example of what one thing we've done. We wanted to take a bunch more questions. We're actually being told we have to wrap because we started at 6 and it is 6:15. And it is 8 o'clock. And thank you, Roxbury folks, but we were going to respect your rules and facilities. I think we'll also be here for a little networking, a little chat if you guys have questions to ask any specific panelists. But again, thank you to everyone. A round of applause for yourself.